that doesn't undermine biology. Right? There's nothing about adoption that says biology is unimportant. Quite the contrary. Everybody knows biology is important. Adopted kids, sometimes more than anyone, understand that biology is important. And furthermore, adoption is a child-centered institution in this sense. Adoption exists to give children the parents they need. Adoption does not exist to give adults the kids they happen to want. That's the difference, okay? So this does not, adoption does not contradict point 3 here. That's my point. The basic way we do parenthood is through biology. That's the basic principle. And then the final principle is that the state recognizes natural parenthood, but does not define parenthood. That is, if you give birth in the hospital, you have a baby, in my case, a nice lady came around with a birth certificate, and we just filled out the birth certificate. We registered an existing fact. We registered the fact that I was the mother and he was the father. The state didn't get to decide who counted as mother and father. We're just writing down something that anyone could see was the truth. Now, these 4 principles, as I say, are going to be undermined by same-sex marriage. And so I now want to show you how that's the case and show you the negative consequences that will flow from undermining these key principles. So we'll take them one at a time. The first one is that marriage will become the kind of thing that separates children from their parents rather than being the kind of thing that attaches children to their parents. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the presumption in common law, and really in every legal system I know about, is that during the life of a marriage, any children that are born to a woman are presumed to be the children of her husband. Okay? So marriage attaches the child really to the father in a way, if you see what I mean. When a woman is married, she gives birth to a baby. Whoever is her husband, he is assumed to be the father of that child. Now, you can see that legal rule basically supports the biological principle, doesn't it? Because in 95% of the cases, it's true. He is the biological father. Right? I mean, that's just how it works. That's how the whole marriage institution is supposed to work. It's supposed to channel sexual activity into marriage, sexual activity and childbearing, all into this thing called marriage. It's supposed to all be wrapped up into one. Now, with same-sex marriage, what will have to happen? If we have one legal institution called marriage that works for same-sex couples and opposite-sex couples, what will have to happen here? If I have a female partner and I give birth to a baby, that female partner will be presumed to be the other parent of the child, which is, in 100% of the cases, false. Right? She is not the other parent. She's simply not, okay? And so marriage then becomes the vehicle by which that little baby is detached from the natural father of the child and reattached to this other person who's got this little piece of paper with me. Okay? So this point here about where babies come from and how it all works, which is really pretty basic, actually drives all of the other points that we're going to be talking about here. Because marriage is now the vehicle that separates the child from their parent rather than the vehicle that attaches them. Go on to point 2. Same-sex marriage asserts, basically without proof, that mothers and fathers are completely interchangeable. Now, I believe that when you say mothers and fathers are perfectly interchangeable, that this sounds like it's equality, but it's not going to operate equally as between men and women. It's not going to handle men and women the same because we've already mentioned the attachment to the mother is more basic, more obvious, and more secure. So when you say moms and dads are interchangeable, it is fathers who will be marginalized from the family. There are several reasons I believe that's the case, but the main one is on the back of a piece of paper. I want you to turn it over and look at the birth certificate that I have there. This is a birth certificate from British Columbia. As you probably know, Canada legalized same-sex marriage a few years ago. Oh, and by the way, isn't it interesting that they're now talking about legalizing polygamy? We're told that that would never happen. But within 5 years, it's happening in our neighbor to the north. But never mind. Overlook that fact for now. And just look here at my birth certificate. At the top, what you have is the information for the child's the child's information, the child's name, birth weight, all that good stuff. Next thing down, mother's information, right? And down at the bottom, where the father's information should be, there's a checkoff box. There's a checkoff box where you can check off whether this is the father of the child or whether this person has agreed to be the co-parent of the child. So motherhood's intact, but fatherhood is now a checkoff box. Fellas, the hair standing up on the back of your head? It should be. It should be. I showed this to the LA Times editorial board when I was working for Prop 8. I said, look at this. And she goes, who cares? A lot of kids don't have fathers. And I'm like, what is wrong with these people? What is wrong with these people? Anyway, well, that's an aside. That is how they think, people on the other side. There are already kids without fathers, so what's the big deal? It's fathers who will be marginalized from the family. The third point. Since biology is the primary way we now determine parenthood, we can't be using biology exactly anymore if we do same-sex marriage. Triple parenting will become unstoppable. And in fact, there are already cases where courts are ordering or permitting, as the case might be, 3 parties to be on birth certificates. How does this come about? We've got a lesbian pair who want both to be recognized as parents, and they're good, hip, progressive people who have read all these studies about how children benefit from having their fathers, and so they want to have a known sperm donor. And so he's on birth certificate too. So these cases are already coming down the pike. And you know, they sound so good when you see them in the newspaper, when people first come up with them and when they're making all their plans. But you know, life has a way of being more difficult than your plans. And I think anyone who's had children for any length of time realizes this can be a very difficult business. And sometimes there's conflict between parents. Have you ever noticed that? Parents ever differ about what to do? Okay. Today I have 3 parents with differing opinions about what to do, okay? And the way we know this is going to happen is these people end up in court. So they end up in court, and the court has to figure out what to do with the child and for the child, and so that's why the courts are making these decisions. And so the whole business of same-sex parenting is leading to a situation where what seems normal now doesn't seem normal anymore. That is, we normally think of 2 parents, oh, and they're just going to change out the father for a mother. But there's no reason to have only 2 parents, say, once you start going down this pipe. You see what I mean? There's no particular reason to stop at 2, or maybe even 3. Now the final point that I want to point out to you has to do with the relationship between the state and society, between government and society. And this is a very big topic, and Bishop Curry hinted at some of this in his remarks this morning when he was talking about church-state relations. But the fact is that what is happening now is that because biology is no longer the basic rule, the state now gets involved in determining who counts as a parent, okay? And here's how this kind of case would come about. I actually read disputed lesbian custody cases. I probably read more of these cases than any non-lawyer in the country. It turns into a hobby of mine, I don't know. But anyway, these cases always have the following feature. You've got a pair of women who maybe had a civil union, maybe didn't have a civil union. That part actually doesn't matter that much. They have a relationship, one of them has a baby, the relationship breaks up, and the non-mother wants to have some kind of custody or relationship with the child. And so they go into court, and they ask that it's not they that go to the court. The non-mother tries to obtain parental rights. So let's look at this. This is a woman who is not the child's biological mother, and who is not the mother by adoption. If there were an adoption, if there had been an adoption, there'd be no case, right? Because if she had done an adoption, she'd be a mother. There'd be no question, right? The law knows what an adoptive parent is, right? So if one was the bio mom, one was the adoptive mom, there wouldn't be any dispute. When they broke up, they both have parental rights. No question about that. So the cases don't ever look like that. The cases always look like a woman who is not the biological mother, who is not the adoptive mother, wanting parental rights. Let us call her a non-parent, okay? So we have a non-parent seeking parental rights, and in some cases the court giving it to them. And what the court does is to come up with 4-part tests or 3-part tests or different kinds of criteria by which they decide whether this person has hung around long enough, has wiped enough noses, changed enough diapers, held herself out to the public as a parent for enough time to enough people to count as a parent. In other words, the state is deciding who counts as a parent. Okay? They are taking over this part of civil society for themselves to decide who counts as a parent. Now, you probably know people who have been through a divorce, and you've seen what the family courts can do to the family. You see what family courts do when they get involved in deciding how much money fathers have to spend and how much time fathers get to spend with their kids. There are all these kinds of little things that the family courts go niggling around in. And that's just the beginning of what will happen when they're actually deciding who counts as a parent in the first place. They're going to be doing all these kind of findings of fact and all this kind of stuff into things that are none of their business, fundamentally. I mean, how many times you change the diaper is really none of their business. And so the state is inviting itself into this whole realm of civil society. And that is why I think we can be sure that it will amount to a very large expansion of the scope of the state's authority and power into civil society. And you notice I haven't yet even touched on to the fact that all the different institutions that object to same-sex marriage in principle will be called into question by the state. And so let me just end with that little point and go on to my last concluding remarks. It doesn't fit exactly onto this little 4-part schema that I have here, but we have to talk about it. And that is, we have to point out that same-sex marriage is not a natural organic institution. It's not something that is sprung naturally from the interaction of persons, right? Same-sex marriage is entirely the creation of the state. Same-sex marriage is entirely the creation of the government, an arbitrary creation of the government that cannot stand by itself. And it needs to be coddled by the state. It needs to be propped up by the state. It needs to be babied along, birthed and diapered by the state. Right? And so that's why they have to suppress people who don't agree with it. That's why they have to shut down the adoption agencies that won't place kids with same-sex couples. That's why they have to get involved in all kinds of areas of civil society that, again, are none of their business. That's why this is happening to us. And that's why I think we can be sure it will continue to happen. It's not simply a quirk or an odd feature, some kind of quirky, unique feature that maybe just happened in Massachusetts once or twice. It's what's happening everywhere. It's what's happening everywhere. So I'd like to round out my remarks by basically helping you to see that there is something significant at stake in the debate over same-sex marriage. So that when people shrug at you, we want to be able to have something to say to them, that there is something at stake. And so what I tried to do was to compose kind of a composite of things that might happen and try to make it human, try to put human faces onto some of these abstract points that I've been talking about. Picture ourselves maybe 20 or 30 years from now, living here in Oakland. And just imagine that you and your grandson, let us say, are going to a private prayer meeting at an apartment building in Oakland. And let's say we have same-sex marriage. I don't think we will, by the way, but let's say. And you've been to this prayer meeting, this apartment building, often enough that you know some of the people who are sitting out in the yard or sitting on the steps. There's old Mrs. Garcia. She's raising her grandchildren. Her daughter got caught up in drugs and men, and she went off the deep end. Her 3 grandchildren have different fathers, and she hopes she can keep all the kids, but you never know what the courts will decide. And then there's Miss Marisol. Her little girl lives with her some of the time, but when she broke up with her boyfriend, he went to court to claim that he was de facto parent and that he should have shared custody. He was doing it to be mean to her, and because he wanted to have access to the little girl, if you know what I mean. Under the de facto parenting law, he counted as a parent because he spent enough time with the child, and she used to call him daddy sometimes. So Marisol's daughter is with her old boyfriend part-time, and she really can't do anything to stop him. She didn't fight too hard because of her friend Lisa, who used to live in the same apartment complex. Lisa got her daughter taken away from her completely. Lisa went into hiding with her daughter when the court ordered her to turn the little girl over to her former girlfriend part-time. Somebody saw where she was hiding, told on her, and she got found. So the little girl got taken away, and Lisa did jail time. So Marisol figured she was better off not fighting with her ex too much. Then